Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a bit of a spontaneous stream here. I'm going to be trying to do streams a little more topical. So I kind of put this together at the last minute because this seemed like just too good of a topic to kind of let pass by. We're going to be discussing the attempt to redefine recession. And to do that, I have a great guest. Many of you probably already know Radical Liberation. He runs a great show on economics. Radlib, thank you for joining me, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually a little complicated. Every other week, I'm doing like what you'd think, like economics, financial market update, that kind of stuff. And then on the off weeks, I'm doing things like a history of left wing terror. So you can find many things at my channel, Radical Liberation.
Yeah, make sure if you haven't subscribed over there, I've got his Twitter and his YouTube. So make sure that you're checking that out. I've known Radical Liberation for a while now, but it's great to finally get him on the channel. All right, guys. So the first thing we're going to do is get into why this is happening. Is there a history of what a recession actually is? All that kind of stuff. And that's where Radlib is going to come in. He's, of course, much more of an expert on this stuff. So, Radical Liberation, can you give us a little background on recession? Recession itself is a redefinition, right?
Yeah, right. Or a new word, right? So depression. Okay, so people may not realize it because we get terrible history. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1945. So it was 16 years long. That left a little bad taste in people's mouths, as you might imagine. So the word depression got a little bit of a negative connotation. So for political reasons, they actually stopped using it a long time ago. So the word recession is not new. It's a swap in for depression. So when they say recession, it's what we would have pre-World War II called depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you have a few recessions, and that word starts getting in there. This is a never-ending journey, right? the
Right.
fleeing from reality. Um, so not only do we have the term recession, but we had a fairly well understood rough and ready definition. There's more complicated ways to figure out whether it's a recession, which the National Bureau of Economic Research does, but they don't announce that till like a year after it started. So that's not very practical for like policy discussions, right? Oh, what shall we do about the thing that started a year ago? So
Right.
so in terms of a live measure, a rough and ready definition has been 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And if you could share that article, Auron, I will.
Absolutely.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so this is from Phil Magnus, great guy, in the Wall Street Journal yesterday or 2 days ago. Sorry. Oh, a note because with Auron, you always want to think about how the narrative is being spun. Notice that this is 2 days ago. The second negative GDP quarter wasn't announced till yesterday. Is Phil Magnus a prophet? No. Before he wrote this article, they had already pre-spinning. They clearly knew the bad news was coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they were already saying, we don't need to think of that as the definition of recession anymore, and stuff like that. Uh, they were already playing the game. So he is responding to the pre-spin before the official announcement is even made, which happened yesterday, right? Okay, so what he says is number one, we long defined a recession as, and here he's quoting from a very important economics text, mainstream economics textbook by Paul Samuelson and William Nordhaus. A recession is a period in which real GDP declines for at least 2 consecutive quarters. That's what I just said, right? 2 negative GDP quarters. And then he goes farther and he says, it's not just in that textbook. You could say, it's just a textbook, right? Well, then he turns to, where is it here? Legislation. Yeah. So there was a Graham-Rudman-Hollings Act, which of 1985. And for various reasons, they needed to have a concrete definition of a recession because that means certain things would kick in the legislation. And they defined a recession as a period when, quote, real economic growth is projected or estimated to be less than zero with respect to each of any 2 consecutive quarters. Okay, so there it is. That's all I wanted to get out of that article, is for you to see that This is not something that like right wingers made up to make Biden look bad or something, right? This is just for many decades, this has been a well accepted definition of recession. And then the fun began, right, Aaron?
So to be clear, it's not just that they're trying to redefine a term that's in common use. This is actually a term of art that
Yeah,
triggers like things in
yeah,
legislation, right?
right. Yeah,
So
yeah,
so this is a word of significance. It's not just a pop culture reference.
right, right,
It, so this is a very powerful thing that we're trying to do here. We're not just recreating the definition of a term as it's used in in kind of a colloquial fashion in real time.
right, right,
We're actively trying to redefine law through kind of this mass manipulation of language at this
yeah,
the in the cathedral, right? So we have all these different aspects of our consensus making apparatus moving kind of in a coordinated effort to shift something that literally alters the way our government and our legislation are enacted and run.
right, right. As in this law, you can just imagine that they have certain things where they say, well, if we get into a recession, we might want to stop doing this and start doing that, right? You would want to have some mechanisms in place, recognizing the reality that we're in a downturn, and so maybe this isn't a great time to like spend a ton of money or things like that, right?
Right.
So exactly the trigger for those sensible things, they would like to hollow that out, play language games, redefine it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing, right? We know that it's essential. We know this is coming. Like every administration needs to downplay these kind of things. They need to say they're unimportant. It's going to be a mild one. It's not going to. We expect that from the press secretary. That shouldn't be surprising. That wouldn't be anything different. But we notice a much more like you said, powerful effort to affect something that is literally written into the law, which really puts us on a different field. And did you have another article you wanted to share, or should I show some of the alterations we saw
No,
online here?
yeah, go right to the
Okay,
fun. I just
all
wanted to
right,
lay it down so everyone understood that we're not like making something up here. And now
right.
let's see what people are saying.
Okay. So yeah, it should be, I hope it's kind of clear to everyone by now that if you buy into this like battle over the if you argue over the technical definition, you're going to have some issues here. It's not that everything's just that Steven said is absolutely correct, and so we want to take a look but we want to take a look at how they're going to treat this, because before we got started, a few people, local distance, a few other people, they said, here's the dictionary definition, and it's exactly what radical liberation just mentioned, right? It's
Right.
exactly the two quarters. But I immediately said, that they're just going to alter this the minute that they're asked. Like, we've seen this before. We've already seen this with the definition of anti-vaxxer. We've seen this with the definition of even woman, right? We
Hmm.
see that
Right.
this is a normal thing that happens. And so just because something is in the dictionary or something like that, it doesn't matter. These people have that control. So this is Mike Cernovich, and he's pointing out that Wikipedia has changed the definition of a recession to favor the Biden regime, right? So the Biden regime puts this out. And as soon as they kind of hint that this is the tack they're taking, that recession doesn't mean what we think it means, everyone else starts picking it up. And as Radlib pointed out, also we notice, and this is really important for people to understand, this narrative building, right? It doesn't all start at once. It's always a rumble in the distance, right? As soon as they know the economy is going to be bad, they know we're going to be in a downturn, they know that this is going to be a storyline that they have to talk about, they start seeding those little bits piece by piece. Well, maybe it's transitory. Maybe recession doesn't really mean what it used to mean anymore. Maybe
Yep.
we're in a new era, right? And so we see this. And of course,
And
now we see.
it's such a leading indicator that
Mhm.
last week I already knew what the announcement would be yesterday because I could see the narrative spinning already beginning. And so they telegraphed the next move in that way.
Absolutely. And if you get good at this, if you're used to watching the news, if you're used to observing the news cycles, you can predict exactly what's going to happen. And I say this all the time. We're not prophets. We're not. We don't have any magical powers. It's just the pattern. If you are allowed to notice, noticing is a crime. But if you free yourself and you're allowed to notice things and you're paying attention and you can remember more than like 2 months into the past, these things become obvious. There's a very obvious cycle, and we'll go through the cycle here in a second. I have one of those pulled up, but what I pointed out here is that because these people are so used to controlling every one of the different arms of the cathedral, they're used to having complete narrative control. They feel really brazen about being able to push this stuff out, and so the only thing you can really do in a lot of ways is discredit these institutions. If you sit there and try to fight over the definition, you'll be correct technically, and it's worth bringing up and pointing out that they've altered it. But you have to understand, at the end of the day, it is the authority of the institution that's the real battlefield, right? Where this consensus actually gets manufactured, that's the real battle line. And so these people are willing to run out there and change the definition at a moment's notice because they don't think it's going to cost them anything. They think they can hit people. They're used to being able to hit the average person with enough different stories and media blasts and everything else that they can just kind of shift reality under people's feet. We saw that the day after the Biden administration kind of made this announcement, the AP, which is the distribution trunk for all news in the United States, was also writing stories about how the definition of recession isn't really what we think it is. And that's when you start wondering, like, okay, so an independent media, right?
Yeah, another example. So here you're showing Wikipedia. You mentioned AP. Investopedia. I looked up on
Oh,
Investopedia
wow.
and saw that they had changed it in March. I don't know how they knew to do that. I mean, maybe the date was wrong, but they had changed it a while back. But again, March of this year, right? Not like years ago. It was in service of the new line. Um, so yeah, the way they move. Now, here's something I've wondered, and this is a little meta, so we don't have to go deep on this, but when do they lose credibility?
Yeah.
Right? Because you do this enough noticing happens, because at this point, a lot of us are just laughing at stuff like this, right? It gets shared around. I mean, Cernovich is not in a corner, right? I mean, he's someone who puts stuff out there and people see it. Um,
Yes.
so there's a lot of people just laughing at them at this point. At what point do they run out of credibility? Because each time they do this, there's at least some people who notice it and say, "Yeah, I'm not paying any attention to the AP anymore," or whatever.
Yeah, and I have something about that I want to go over in just a second.
Okay,
That's a good, because
good,
I
good.
think that's a significant point here. But let me share another one that kind of points to our uh, attempts to alter this in real time. So obviously we know they have the control of these institutions. They can shift definitions when it comes to Wikipedia or the dictionary, something like that. But they also have the ability to get even financial reporters, right? This Ben White is let's see, he's the chief economic correspondent for CNBC. This is what he does, right? And he says, yeah, I did a bad tweet a while ago referring to 2 negative quarters in a row as a recession. Should have known better at the time, but it's been a while since I studied the recession criteria, right? Like this is his job, but he doesn't know what a recession is. I mean, come on. Like,
It's
I
just
understand
absurd.
journalists are lazy, but who's buying this, right?
Right, right.
So yeah, so he says this, and then someone, I don't have this pulled up right away, but someone points out that in a story like 2 months ago he used that definition.
Right.
two
Yeah, this is like
months
digging up from decades ago. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so this I feel like this is something that, like, dear leader would feel jealous at this level of control, right? Where
Right.
you could make a professional, who, this is all they do is communicate this professional knowledge to the people, right? And you can make them on a moment's notice completely alter, like, the definition of something inside their discipline, and something that they used just a couple months ago, and they'll do it, and they'll grovel before you. Oh, please forgive me for not having the latest NPC update, not knowing what should be the newest terminology. It's really sad, and it's something that is incredibly authoritarian, even though it's very soft.
Right. And I know, some people would laugh at thinking of economics as science, and there is a lot of economics that isn't very scientific. But as an Austrian economist, I think economics can be a science. And this is getting very close to, and I think we've seen it cross the line of what I would think of as Lysenkoism, right? Named after the Russian biologist whose pronouncements on biology didn't win out because he had proven it scientifically, proven his point scientifically, but because he had the backing of the state. He had the favor of Stalin or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And so literally scientists who disagreed with him on scientific grounds would just get sent to the gulags or whatever, right?
Right.
Well, we don't exactly do that as far as I know, but I don't feel it's crazy to use the term Lysenkoism for the sorts of things we're saying. If you can make an economist say that the definition of of recession that they've been using for many decades, and it's not a terrible definition when you look back. It actually is how recessions a good indicator of a downturn. Um, if you can make them just change like a fundamental term in their art or in their science, whatever you want, however you want to think of it, I call that Lysenkoism. I mean, it's not sending people to camps, maybe, but you have the same level of politics trumping reality, the scientific process, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I've seen some people jump on people who refer to this as communist or communist like, and they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. You make yourself look silly, referring it to that way. No one can take you seriously. You look historically ignorant. But I mean, really, come on. Again, these people, like you're right. It's amazing what you can get away with as long as your totalitarianism is soft. Like it really
Mm,
is
right.
amazing that people in America are just trained to think, well, as long as no one's going to a gulag, as long as I can still
Yeah.
go down and like order a cheeseburger, then I'm free, right? Like that's all that
Right.
liberty requires of me is that
Right. So, Auron, I haven't dropped my big phrase on you. Ready? You're
yeah,
free
here
to
we go.
steal it. We have learned nothing from the 20th century.
Yeah.
Right? That is what we were always taught. We've learned some big lessons from the 20th century. I mean, some bad things happened. We really learned something from it. No, we didn't. All we did is we compartmentalized something like the Soviet Union or the Nazis as like evil, threw it over there, and learned nothing from it. Right?
No, it's absolutely true. And I think of course I'm deep into Burnham and
Right.
Francis and the managerial revolution and all of that.
Yeah.
But it is truly amazing that people don't understand that it was just the American version of managerialism that won out, and that by creating the public-private distinction and enshrining it in the way that we did in our managerialism, it allowed our governments to basically take just unprecedented levels of control without anyone noticing, which
Right. Right.
is something I'm writing about at the Total State, which
Yeah.
Radlib has been very kind to help me edit. So
Yeah.
I'll have fewer embarrassing spelling errors when you guys are reading my chapters going forward. Um, but yeah, it does an amazing amount of work, and we can see right here another organ of the cathedral working in their favor. Right, we have PolitiFact, and of course the fact checkers have always just been a fancy rebranding of commissars. Right, like
Yeah.
there's the,
Yeah,
I,
I don't know if you saw me saying this on Twitter, but I said, how is it that so many of us, as soon as we saw the term fact checkers, we knew that it would just be a tool of political control? Like we didn't even need to see them publish anything. Just the term fact checkers, we knew it, right?
so the interesting thing is that a lot of people don't, right? The amazing thing is how well this rebrand worked for so many people. Well, this
Really?
guy is a fact checker, right? Again, we take it for granted, like guys, people on our stuff coming there, right? It's so obvious for this worked really well. This was a really successful rebranding, and you really want to. I really people not instead of touch grass, like go touch a normie, like talk to people who are not plugged into this stuff every once in a while to make sure that you get a feel for like how effective this propaganda is, because it really does work on people. And so while I think they are stretching the credibility of fact checking at this point, it was a very successful rebrand for a while. They probably got almost a decade out of kind of how this stuff worked. This stuff started a little over a decade ago now
Oh
with the
wow, I
fact
didn't
check.
remember how far back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
actually,
so it
PolitiFact
took the it took
is a
them a while to burn through the credibility of fact checker, right?
right. Actually, PolitiFact is a rebranding of the St. Petersburg Times, which is
Mm,
a left wing paper down in Florida, and a lot of people don't know that. Like they think that there's some there's kind of some nerve center where they're like receiving all the facts so they can. No, it's just a bunch of guys sitting at a liberal editorial desk, like figuring out how to spin your news for you. But let me bring up some more other ones here. Actually, this is a good time. I wanted to discuss with you also what people have been asking. Okay, if two quarters isn't the actual definition, if that's what we're saying isn't the definition, then what is the definition, right? And you'll
Okay.
notice that they never give one.
Well, actually,
Or did they give one? I didn't.
well,
Maybe I missed.
something they tried to pull,
Okay.
which is just the most ridiculous thing ever, is this thing about the National Bureau of Economic Research. Okay, so the National Bureau of Economic Research, number one, it's not the official arbiter of recessions, but it's it's a respected private group that studies these things, and they indeed use a lot more. They employ a robust set of indicators to pinpoint recessions. Okay, um, and the reason they can do that and that they are fairly trusted is because they wait for some data that isn't available for a while. Okay, so the NBER does come out and officially say things are recession, but it can be like a year after the recession starts. So for the Biden administration to say, well, we're looking to the NBER to tell us there's a recession is an amazingly transparent sleight of hand, if you know that, right? They're basically
Gotcha.
saying, wait 6 more months and then we'll find out if we are in a recession right now. Well, that's not very practical for policymaking or for understanding what's going on to find out later, right? It's maybe useful for economists who want to study things historically to have it feel like they've got an accurate definition of when a recession started and ended and all that sort of thing, right? But it doesn't help us today to talk about the recession in 2022. So
Sure.
it's just a nutty. It's amazing they tried to pull that one.
But that's the beauty of being able to hand this thing over to experts, right? Because you notice that the experts may have produced the original definition, but that original definition is too constraining, right? It doesn't allow enough wiggle room. It doesn't allow them to manipulate. And so we need to abstract it. We need to make it so that the expertise cannot be understood by the average person. So it's no longer about these two observable pieces of data. It's now about a consensus of experts that happens behind a closed door. It's obscured far enough away. The priests have to have the knowledge back in the back room, and they will bring it forward when we deem it necessary. The average layman,
we watch for the color of the puff of smoke
exactly,
to come out of the Fed or something.
Yeah. Once the Fed releases the green smoke, we know we are
Right.
officially under a recession, right?
Right.
Yeah, so you'll notice that, and this is increasingly the case, right? Things that used to be knowable, like what is a woman or what is a vaccine, those things
Right.
are no longer understandable by the average person. They now
Yeah.
they have to increasingly be handed over to people who have more and more credentials and obscure knowledge, right? So,
Right.
so that's really key. Is in every avenue, economics, medicine, whatever it is, everything needs to be more and more reliant on backroom decisions made by the experts.
Right. And it always feels patronizing to me to be on the receiving end of that. It's like, you little person, you cannot understand the great wise things that we understand. We
Yeah.
we will reveal it to you in our own good time. You know?
And to be fair, I think all governments have to do this, right? Like, I don't think all governments can explain to every human under their rule the intricacies of their decision making. So I think this mechanism always exists to some extent in every regime and every government. But it's the laundering through science that's particularly egregious, because liberalism gives us this illusion that every person has an active role in their governance, right? Everyone gets
Mm-hmm.
to make the decisions. Everyone has a vote. Everyone has a voice. It's the popular consensus that drives the decision making. And so they have to play this game where people are informed on something while still finding ways to remove those decisions away from democracy as much as possible, and obfuscate the logic of those decisions behind as much expertise as possible. Because if they don't, then people might start asking inconvenient questions, as you had pointed out earlier. So here we have a story from The Economist about the silver lining of the recession, and how actually the different things that could come from the recession, the value of it. So I
What's
just kind of
funny is the different stages you line out here. Sometimes it seems like they're not completely coordinated, or maybe it's just when you see an article from a couple days ago at the same time as you see something now. Anyway, the experience on the individual end, I think, is that you will see them saying things like it's not happening and it's a good thing simultaneously. Like,
yes.
you'll flip through Twitter and one story is telling you it's not happening and the next thing is telling you it is happening and it's good. So it's like cognitive dissonance,
Well, that's actually, I think that's a feature, not a bug, right? So
Right.
one of the things that people don't get confused about with the cathedrals, they're like, "Oh, well, that means that there's zero coordination between people," and that's not true. Or they'll say, "Oh, you're saying that every one of these institutions is in lockstep 100% all the time. It's a conspiracy," and that's not true either. The beauty of this decentralized network is that one institution of significance signals the move. And then all the other institutions of significance notice that move and they start moving too. But just like anything that requires this multi part thing, some move faster, some move slower. Everyone's moving the same direction, but at different paces. And what this does is creates the illusion of conflict, of disagreement, while everyone moves the same direction. By the way, this is what conservatism does too, guys. I hate to break this to you, but Fox News does this for the left as well. They integrate the definitions of the things the left decided 10 years ago. They are the tail end of the cathedral. They are not separate from it, right?
Right. They're the caboose, but they're still part of the train, right?
Exactly. And so the what that means is that there's never any real opposition, because everyone is just moving towards the same goal at different speeds. As Michael Mouse likes to say, conservatism is, progressivism going the speed limit, right? And so the fact that some of these people are saying it's not happening, while some of them are saying, oh, it's definitely happening, is actually good for them, because it makes it look like, there isn't some kind of coordinated conspiracy, because there isn't. But there is this general understanding, there's this general signaling across the lines of communication, across the expert classes, across the ruling classes, that this is the direction we need to be going. And if we get there slower or faster, that used to not be a big deal. But what we're seeing is that we need to get there faster and faster and faster, because the levels of break, the things they're trying to push on people and break from reality are more and more extreme. And that's why I think, Radlib, you were talking about, when does this start falling apart, right? Because you
Right,
start
right.
seeing the cycle happen quicker and quicker, and eventually you feel like the rubber has to come off this tire.
Yeah, and I just as you were talking, I was just thinking about sort of the static view versus the dynamic view, right? I lined out a static view. I look at my Twitter feed and I see one person saying this and one person saying what seems kind of like the opposite, right? But
Hmm.
the picture you're giving is a process picture,
Yes.
right? And I think the noticers, or whatever you want to call us, we tend to want to talk about the dynamic process, right? The directionality, the motion, the movement. And what I'll notice is an argumentative trick is to try to get away from that and just focus on, well, yeah, but that's not what's being said right now,
Yeah,
right? Like
that's
we don't call the recession that today.
yes.
So why are you bringing up what we called it last week?
Yes.
where we're interested in this process of, redefinition of terms and changing the rules over time, right? Because that tells a different story.
So one of the traps for conservatism that's a huge problem, or the right in general, is that the news cycle is the money maker, right? That's where money is made, by being topical, being on the algorithm, talking about the thing of the day, being thrown into the articles and things. And because the left and the cathedral in general dictates the terms of that news cycle, that means that the right is always chasing the topics and the frame of the left. And so
Right.
I think the reason that people pay attention to people in our sphere is we're trying to step out of that frame as much as possible. And it's, don't get me wrong, guys, it's always tempting. I do this, I am trying to do more topical streams. So in some
It's what
ways,
we're doing right
it's
now.
right we're
Yeah.
doing right now, yes. But what we're trying to do at the very least is pull back a little bit and say, okay, what happened outside of the last 3 days? Let's actually look to the left and look to the right. Let's provide context for this and think about, and this is the big thing for conservatives and right wingers. What does this do with power? What does this mean with the narrative? How is this being applied? Not just, don't just get stuck arguing the technical definition. Radical liberation can do that. He can crush you in it. He's got you, he's got you, that he's there for you with that. But also he's going to help you look outside and say, okay, but why are they applying things the way they are? Don't just get bogged down thinking that if you apply the correct factoid, you're suddenly going to win the debate, because that's not really the purpose of what they're doing. I think that to answer your question from earlier, in large part, I think the persuasive value of the cathedral is starting to fall apart, but it
Hmm.
does have another role. So let me bring up a tweet I
I,
did
I just
today.
want to mention, Aaron, one of the old charges against, conservatives or right wingers is that they're stuck in the past. You want to be back in the Middle Ages or something, right? And that for some reason that obviously is not an option. I'm not clear why that's assumed, that's implicit, but um, I just note that that stuck in the past rhetorical trick, for me at least, becomes a little bit persuasive when being stuck in the past means like remembering last week or even yesterday. you know you're stuck in last week. We don't mean that by recession. We don't Recession doesn't mean that anymore.
Well, that's the beauty of the eternal present, right? Is they constantly get to bombard people, and understanding or being aware of your position in a tradition or in a history, or the great chain. That's all negative. That's all, for people, for John Lithgow from Footloose, right? That's all
Right.
backwards.
Right.
But that's the very thing that's essential for pointing out what they're doing with their power and how they're doing it, which is, of course, why they hate it so much. So here we have, Bill Clinton using exactly the definition of recession that you've referenced several times, right?
Hmm.
And a lot of people were doing this, going back through all these different things. Here's Barack Obama using it. Here's these
Yeah.
left wing
Is the
reporters
accepted
using it.
definition for like the post World War II era, or something. So yeah, you can do this all day long if you want.
Exactly, right. And you can do this all day long, and it's the same thing you could do with the meaning of vaccine, or the same thing you could do with the meaning of a woman, or the same thing you could do with the meaning of marriage. But
Right.
that's the point, right? Is what these people are doing is, it's not just about persuading anymore. I think we're getting, as things polarize and we get kind of closer and closer to the edge, both sides have secured most of the ground they're going to secure, right? People are still moving for that middle ground as much as possible, trying to capture as many of the kind of independents floating around as possible. But I think things are getting more and more sharply, polarized, and moving away from each other. They're really we're increasingly existing in two realities that cannot be reconciled. And as that happens, this stuff stops being a tool of persuasion and it starts being a loyalty pledge, right? It's not
Hmm.
about whether you actually think the technical definition of a recession is yada yada yada. It's about whether you'll say it. It's about whether
Yeah.
you'll change your definition of woman. It's about whether you'll change your definition of vaccine. It's about whether you'll change your definition of marriage, which a lot of right wingers have. Will
Hmm.
you go along with this? Will you pledge allegiance to the new regime, right? And if you'll change your definition of these things, then we know you're on our team. And I did that article about nonsense as a effective uniform. I used some of Curtis Yarvin's writing with that clown form. That's increasing. It's about actually yes, you'll still be able to move a lot of the normal mainstream people by just blasting them this stuff. But increasingly, it's about getting people to declare their allegiance openly to patently ridiculous things in the hope that you will kind of obviously show who's friend and enemy.
Yeah, that's good. So we should we should think of when someone uses the term in the new way, recession or vaccine or woman or whatever, they use it according to the new required definition, politically required definition. We should probably picture in our mind someone saluting, right?
Yes,
They're saluting the regime. Yes, sir.
yes, absolutely, glorious
What?
leader. We too.
Yes, sir. What else should I change, sir?
Yes, they're showing that they too have received their NPC update. And by the way, I forgot a little bit about this, but Academic Agent talked about this in the Populist Delusion in his Carl Schmitt chapter, right? That the current thing, is a constant friend enemy distinction signaling device,
Right.
right? And so it's constantly updating everyone on who's friend and who's enemy, who's still along, who's still acceptable, who can be handed power by the regime, and who must be jettisoned. But the cost, as he pointed out, is the discarding of competent people, right? This is always the danger of Leninism, is as you discard people who are insufficiently loyal, you also discard the capable, and that weakens your regime even as it secures your power inside of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just imagine what well, I remember seeing it. Who was that guy? He was like a elderly Nobel Prize winning scientist, and he made a joke about women crying in the lab or something like that,
Yeah.
and just got destroyed and lost a bunch of, his posts and so on and so forth. He was just like an old guy who didn't get the latest update, right? But was very, very competent in his field. And now, they taught him a lesson, sure, but also he was a genuinely top brilliant scientist even at that elderly age that was lost from making a contribution. So how many people like him do you lose before you start to show planes start to crash, right?
Well, and yeah, that's the thing with like the IDW, right? Is as much as I rag on these people, they are genuinely competent people, and for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, they follow the exact pattern you're talking about. Guys like Sam Harris, they were
Mm-hmm.
100% on board with the left wing. They were 100% loyal to the regime. They had no reason to question any of this, and then they just step slightly to the left or slightly to the right on one issue one
Right.
time, and all of a sudden you've discarded these people. And how many of those guys can, even if they just become kind of the new neocon controlled opposition, how many of these guys can you jettison from the academy and from high level positions before, like you said, the lights go out, right? and
Right.
and, and so
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. All right, we've got some super chats coming up. I know
Okay. Cool.
Radlib has to go here at the end of the hour, so don't want to run too long here. So let's check those out.
Yeah.
Falling
Well, we're
outside.
we're we're learning together on how to do, because my producer was saying the same thing. Do these quick. You don't have to take a long time. Just something topical. Jump on it. Do a quick stream. In and out. Right. So we're
Yeah,
we're we're gonna practice this. Right.
yes, we're both trying to get a little better at trying to do the topical stuff. Absolutely.
Right.
So, falling outside the normal moral constraints for $2. Radlib, loving your series on the leftist violence. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. This is a series we're doing. I'm doing with our friend Ryan Turnipseed, on the left wing terror. And our last episode, we talked about the mass murder in the Vendée region of France by the French revolutionaries. And I'm telling you, I mean, I've been studying mass murder for 40 years, but nevertheless, after going through some of the details, the horrible details, um, I was, it took some time to recuperate emotionally. I mean, it was really horrendous what they did. And I was just saying the other day, yesterday on the show, that how dare they take the moral high ground, right? Because they're always taking the moral high ground, right? Are on, the right is are well, they're immoral basically. I mean, they use a lot of different words to say it, white supremacist, and whatever the term of the day is. But what it comes down to is they're saying the right is immoral. Okay, well, these are the ideological descendants of the people who did horrifying things, uh, to torture young girls back in the late 1700s, and then in the Bolshevik Revolution, and then in the Spanish Civil War, and we'll be covering all these things anyway.
Yeah, no, that's it's a shocking story. I didn't of course I knew lots of bad things that happened in the French Revolution, but it wasn't until it was the guy who does History of Rome. He does really great podcasts. He has one called Revolutions, and he did one on
Mm.
the French Revolution. And when he got into, I always want to call it vade because I try to destroy any French word whenever I say it, much to the as I anger all of my Canadian audience whenever I pronounce something on my stream. But yeah, it's really horrific when you read about that, and it's amazing the popular understanding of the French Revolution as a
Yeah,
force for good. Like you just talk to
exactly.
the average person, they have no clue. So I'm really glad you're
Right.
doing that. The more that gets out, the better. Let's see. JS, thank you for your donation, sir. They'll really start measuring GDP in Excels per day. Yes, the production of Excel sheets will at some point be the question of England. Yeah, it's only a matter of time. Let's see here, or the condition of England, I should say. All right, Nurkash here for $5. Thank you very much for your donation. Says, what's the over under on Twitter banning the word recession? Yeah, that seems
That's funny.
increasingly possible, right? Yeah, yeah.
Now, but to be fair, some of these other examples we've been using, they didn't actually ban those words, right? Like woman, marriage, vaccine, anti-vax. They just tried to shift the meaning of the word without actually ejecting the word altogether, which is interesting, right? Because there are other words that they do ban.
They have banned, yes. So what they do with those is they ban particular usages of them, right?
Right.
So you can
Right.
use the word woman as long as you're not using it to define someone who's actually like no longer a woman or making it very clear that that person is not a woman. You can't
Right.
use it
Right.
in that way, right? So
Right.
it's
Right.
you can't use it to define specific things. Same thing with vaccine, right? You can use the word vaccine, but if you say like, well, this thing isn't a vaccine because it doesn't do X, that's where you're in trouble, right?
That's a good
And
point. So
yeah,
yeah, they haven't banned those words, those examples we were using. They didn't literally ban the word, but they did ban certain usages of the word.
yes.
And have seen people get kicked off for misuse, using the term in the old way,
Yep.
basically. Right?
And we've also seen obviously the possible banning of the term that rhymes with rumor. I'm just saying that because YouTube apparently is demonetizing possibly people who use that term as well. So we're just going to,
Oh,
I guess,
oh,
try
right.
to avoid that. But yeah, we see that some words get banned outright. Some words they demand the proper usage, right? That
Hmm.
which is
Right.
maybe even more sinister. We need you.
Yeah.
It's compelled speech. You must use
Right.
the word this way. It's not even that we're going to ban it. We're going to require this specific usage of the word.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Life of Brian for $5. Thank you very much. It must be somewhat coordinated because the entire state apparatus is pushing the exact same line, giving the illusion of basic truth to insanity. Yeah, to be
Okay.
clear,
Yeah. What do we mean by coordination? I mean,
this
if
is always
Auron
the issue.
mentions an idea, if Auron mentions an idea, and I like that idea, and I mention it on my show, did we coordinate? I mean,
Yes.
we listened to each other, we paid attention to each other. Ultimately, I think that kind of adds up to a form of coordination. But coordination can also be used to mean, like, issuing orders, like in a military outfit. And
Yes.
I don't think that's exactly the picture we have, right, Oron? That it's that kind of coordination.
Yeah, this is the one that always gets stuck. I think particularly academic agent gets stuck with this use of coordination. He always says like, well, obviously like they're talking and they're planning some of this. And yes, he's right. They absolutely
Yeah,
are, right? But
sure.
when I say it's kind of emergent, I mean it happens like you were saying across kind of a cultural line, kind of
Right.
a shared reference point. So if
Yeah.
you use a good phrase or I use a good phrase or Turnip has a good phrase or AA has a good phrase, we will all maybe start adopting it. Did
Yep.
did AA write out a thing? Well, now he has. He actually did use a manifesto, but I was gonna say, did he write something that said everyone has to use clear them out? No, but he brought that up, and it was so effective, and it was such a good way to express something that everyone adopted it. Same thing you see with like
Catches. Yeah.
the GAE, right? Or terms like that, where we see these things that they're not technically a coordination, but a certain group of people who have a certain level of visibility inside a community start using something and suddenly it
Yeah.
spreads to everyone, right? And
Right.
so
And the extra level is that there's a selection process, right? An evolutionary selection process, which
mhm,
is those who do not pay attention to those cues, right? Even if they're not like direct orders, you're supposed to kind of get it. This is the new line. You should be
Yes.
pushing it, right? Those who don't pay attention to those cues are eased out of positions of, you know, prominence in journalism and so forth, right?
Exactly. It's
Like,
that constantly signaling
yeah,
friend enemy. It's the uniform.
exactly.
Did you
Right,
put on the new uniform today? Do you
right,
have the code word from today? You don't have the
right.
code word? Maybe you don't get the next promotion. You know,
Exactly.
maybe
Right,
the guy who's paying a little more attention is on the ball. Maybe he's the guy who gets it. Yeah.
exactly. Right.
All right, let's see. Nurkish for $5. Thank you again, sir. Fox News: monkeypox is not a gay disease, and suggesting so harms the gay community, who constitutes nearly 100% of people who have contracted. Yeah, did you see that segment with Kennedy where her and her guests scream at the guy who
Yeah.
just points out that like the CDC has said that this is
Right.
how this disease spreads, and you shouldn't
But
do this thing
but then on
anymore.
the other hand, our what I don't know what to call him, someone who we often more feel sympathy with, Tucker Carlson, went with the vote of the people to call it schlong COVID, which
Which
I just could not
is
believe those words came out of his mouth. That
could
was
be the
just
greatest thing that has ever happened on
yeah.
television. Yes.
We have too much fun.
Yeah, no, you gotta appreciate that Tucker Carlson is willing to shitpost. Like that's all you
Yeah,
can really
yeah.
say. Is
Right,
like,
right, right.
but yeah, no. Again, this is why I say like Fox is not your friend, right? Like it's good
Mhm.
that guys like Tucker Carlson are on there. It's good that they let people like Pedro and other people on there who are
Mhm.
effective. But don't assume that just because someone is on Fox, they're your friend. That's not
No
the
way.
case. That
No
is
way.
not even approaching the case. All right. Our next one here, Life of Brian for $5. That these people claim the right to redefine any word they want at any time demonstrates that for this cohort, administration itself is the sacred. Yeah, I mean, in
Mm.
many ways, they think
And
they
by
can.
by administration, I would think he's kind of talking about the managerialism you were referring to earlier,
I
perhaps?
believe so. That's how
Yeah,
I read
yeah.
it.
Right, right. Hmm.
No, I think it's very clear that they see themselves as being able to shape reality, right? And when we
Mhm.
say the term high priest, that sounds hyperbolic, but isn't, right? Like this is what gets
Right.
people like this is what has like James Lindsay spinning out about when like he sees me use this stuff. Like they have a hard time understanding that people will be religious and they will adopt
Mhm.
this
Right.
pose. It will happen whether you want to acknowledge it or not. The dynamic is there. I make people angry on both camps by calling it religion because some people will be like, well, it doesn't have the aesthetic qualities. And like, yes, of course, it's the worst possible form of religion. It is the ugliest, stupidest, most debased form of it. But
Right,
you
right.
really need to understand the impulses here because I think Life of Brian is right in that they truly do see this as a sacred mandate once it's handed down. There are
Mhm.
rituals involved.
Yeah.
You have to carefully recite these things. It may seem stupid. It may seem petty. It may seem like a ugly shell of what we think of as religion because it is all those things. But not understanding it inside that dynamic, I think, is a mistake. A lot of
Yeah.
people
Agreed.
will rag on. They'll say NRX is dead or it doesn't matter. It's not useful anymore. Or if you go back to all these other reference points, you'll understand this better. But I think essays like Richard Dawkins got pwned, where he explains progressivism and religion is in and of itself extremely valuable, and it would always point people back to those as good places to kind of get on board and understand the importance of that concept.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention Bob Dylan's song, you got you're
You got
gonna
to serve
you're
somebody.
gonna serve somebody, right? It's
Yes.
he was so right. It's just the way we work as humans.
If you haven't listened to Slow Train Coming, you just
Yeah, yeah.
I
It's
don't know
great.
what you're doing with your time. All right, James here. Thank you for your donation. When do we all relocate to a sustaining city in Siberia to escape the GAE?
The
Uh,
global
you know,
American empire.
Yeah, they're trying to do. Peter Thiel's trying to do the floating cities, right? That's
Right,
the
right.
NRX escape, right? Is just build new land, right? Just create new islands, and then you can own them there. So I mean, as soon as you get those up and running, let me know. Like I'm supposed to be getting the Thiel bucks. As soon as I get those Thiel bucks in, I'll let you guys know when we're planning the escape on the floating city. The life
I
raft
will
here.
say as a personal comment that long ago I asked the Lord if I should go into foreign missions because very common in my church for people to become missionaries, and I got one of the clearest words of the Lord ever, which was no. And so I'm stuck here,
Yeah.
and I want to make it work somehow. So I'm
Yeah.
not giving up.
I gotta say, if you haven't watched Rob in South Africa, check, because
Mm.
they really are in an advanced version of our position. Everything's not a one to one, but it really is like staring into the future. And people ask them all the time, it's so dangerous there. The things look so bleak. Why don't you just emigrate? Why don't you just go somewhere else, start a new life? Blah blah blah. And their response is always the same: "This is my home. This is the home of my father and my father before me. This is my land, and this is where this is where I'm gonna stay." And again, maybe someday it'll get so bad, just for the good of the family or something, gotta go somewhere else. But until that point comes, I think there's a lot of value in staying where you're at and trying to make it
Yeah,
work.
to be fair, I should double check my dates, but I think the Boers were settling in South Africa before anyone was here. Any Europeans were in the United States, or
Yeah, I
there
believe
weren't
that's
very
true.
many. There weren't very many here. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
All right, let's see. Jacob for $5. Thank you very much. My dog needs a haircut, so I'm taking her to the demonetized bank account frozen FBI open up. Yeah. If you hear the Gestapo knock, guys, you know what happened here.
Though,
Um,
Auron, I mean, they do signal to us in doing something like that when we've, what's the thing about when you find Mosh push the sword in, right? They
mhm.
signal to us when we're striking pay dirt, right? That term was seemed to be really, they weren't shrugging it off, and they wanted to shut it down instead. So,
Mhm.
do you think that's true? That sometimes that sort of reaction from the regime tells us that we're onto something, basically.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I've said this from the beginning with rumor. It was a very effective term. It had too much power. It had the ability of being catchy, like arresting, very mimetic, and most importantly, true. Right? It was
Right.
technically true in the best
Yeah.
way, because
Right.
even if these people weren't acting with the goal of like specifically victimizing children, they were preparing them to be,
To be yeah. Yeah.
even if that was not their intention.
Which
And so that,
preparing could be considered a synonym for the forbidden term. Yeah.
exactly. Yes. Yeah, yes, preparers. Yeah, I mean, not
Yeah.
not quite as catchy, but maybe
Right.
a way.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what it is. And so I think it was powerful and it was accurate, and that's why it had to go.
Right.
So yeah, I think that is absolutely how we can tell the difference between what terms get the axe. I think also certain terms, because they're already in common use, must be subverted, as where others that come from outside and acquire a particular sting can be dismissed because they don't have to be worked into the common language.
Mm, mhm.
Woman and vaccine and recession, these terms have been with us too long. They're too
Yeah, yeah.
useful. They're too common. In this case of like recession woman, they're literally written into legislation.
Right.
And
Yeah,
like you said,
like a favorite term of both of ours, anarcho-tyranny. As far as I can tell, they've never tried to ban that or anything, but also it doesn't have quite the mimetic power. So,
I
there you
think
go.
one guy actually lost his job about it. I think he actually
Oh,
lost like
no
his
kidding.
Patreon and his job. I'm trying to remember who it is. I remember the good old boys talking about, like, they didn't want to say the term for a while on their podcast because there's this one guy, like it was like some poor leftist who like just wandered out and was like, "Hey, have you guys heard of this term, a narco?" And just like got nuked from orbit.
Wow. No kidding.
Because yeah, so I don't remember the whole story. I might be not
Thanks for
communicating that
telling me
exactly
that.
right, but
Using the logic I was just suggesting, that suggests that that term might have some power, and we
yeah,
should keep working on it, right?
I think it is a useful term. I think it's something
Yeah.
that people immediately understand. Once
Mhm.
you explain it to them once, it sticks with them, and they can't stop seeing it everywhere. And
Right.
that's what you want. That's what you want
Yep.
for people who are looking for propaganda 101. Here's your secret: is something that's catchy, mimetic, stays with you, and is impossible to stop noticing once you start noticing. And so that's always valuable, which I think is why certain sign tapping works. Um, but all right, guys, we worked our way through all of our super chats here. So I
Excellent.
just want to thank a few people real quick. And like I said before, make sure you're checking out Radlib's stuff. It is fantastic. You should 100% be following him on Twitter and doing that. Oh, we got one more real quick. Sorry
All
here.
right.
Sweetbriar McCullum for $20. Thank you. You're a lovely new find for me. Good work. Lunch is on me. Well, thank you very
Nice.
much, guys. We appreciate it. And I know a lot of new people are coming in. I really appreciate all the new people at the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please make sure to do so. Also, the Substack is the other place I post a large amount of my stuff. So if you're
Yeah.
not over at the Substack yet, you should be checking that out as well. Speaking of, let me thank a few new supporters on Subscribestar. I've got Rayman01. I've got subscriber number 1C5AE482. Want to thank Desreg. I want to thank Keynesian. I want to thank Enlightened Despot. I want to thank F1F00C09, Easter Worshipper, Christopher Walsh. I want to thank AWXYZ and Santa. That's right, the big man supports us here. E0425302. Yeah, thank all of you
Excellent.
who are making this possible. All right, Radlib, thank you again for coming on. I appreciate you getting that
Yeah,
hour in with me when you could.
I just wanted to mention Shilling Subscribestar for people
Yes.
who might not have even heard of it. I get support through that as well. And the great thing about it is we actually get more of the money that you donate.
Mhm.
Whereas like memberships on YouTube and super chats and so forth, Google takes quite a cut. And I can't help but noticing it's Google taking it,
Yes.
who is not exactly our friend, as opposed to Subscribestar, who they take less and they have not kicked all our friends off. So, you know, I'm just saying Subscribestar is a great way to support. So glad to hear you're getting support through that. Well, I was just going to say on you know, next time, you know, I should do this outside with like the wind whipping me, and I can say reporting from the
Yes,
middle
yes,
of a, you know,
action, yeah.
right,
Our
action report.
correspondent, yeah. Well, do you have a cast coming up tonight, right? You have a show coming up tonight on this
No, no,
subject,
no.
or
It's my show was yesterday. It's
oh, I'm
on
sorry.
my
Okay,
show is every Thursday, and we covered the title of the show was called The Non-Recession.
yeah, excellent.
And so we talked about that, and then we brought a little bit more economic analysis to what's going on, and watched. We've been paying attention to energy prices, for example, like the price of the gas at the pump and stuff like that. Actually, had some good news on that front. Um, so we do that I do that every other week with our friend Black Horse from Canada, who brings some great understanding of financial markets. So you can come there for that, and then come there for the sort of current news, and then stay for the every other week when we do things like history of left-wing terror, and do a lot of like political theory, history, providing context, remembering things,
Yes.
noticing things, stuff like that.
So you and Turnip will be doing that this Thursday. What time?
That should be coming up this Thursday around 4 p.m. Central Time. Let's call it that.
Okay, perfect. All right, guys. Thank you again for joining us so much. We appreciate all the donations and the great discussion in the chat. And as always, we'll talk to you next time.